Excellent, excellent. So thank you again. Good morning. And so our first question that we kind of, first of all, you know what we're doing, and that we're just trying to survey the Presbytery staff and leaders as we continue to move forward, in our discernment. We're very grateful for the service, especially of yours. I mean, we're grateful for all of our leaders, but in particular yours, because for lack of better purposes, you know where all the bones are buried, uh, everything. And so, as we move forward and discerning of how we move the presbytery, our staffing model, and some of the other things that we may or may not know to give kind of direction and discernment, for the presbytery to move forward as we go into this immense space of transition. And so we're
Mhm.
grateful again that you're meeting with us. Andrea Graham and Joe B. Martin. Matt will be back in just a few minutes. So, the team, and we're just grateful. I'm glad that you guys are joining me this morning. And so, our first question again is reflecting on the presbytery. In your experience, what role does the presbytery currently play in your work or role, and what do you wish it could play?
Well, that was kind of a little bit of a tough question because thinking about the presbytery, obviously, I think more about the individual members of congregations as well as the minister members. Um, so the main thing that came to my mind was just support both ways. Me supporting the churches and congregations as well as the ministers, and vice versa, them supporting me. So the biggest role I think is that being a source of um, support and resourcing. Try, if there's something I don't know, I usually try to help people figure it out, try to find out. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to try to help you find out what the answers are. Um, so, just having that trust. Um, what was it, 13 years ago when the presbytery was downsized, when the staff was downsized from 12 down to three? The biggest problem we had at that point was trust. Nobody trusted the presbytery staff or the committees. And I think, during Betty Meadows' tenure, that flipped. She helped to really, really, Sonia, because you were a part of the Emmaus team.
I do.
She really did help to lead that process of rebuilding the trust. And I think that that has grown since we've been on in the last 13 years. That's why we've got commission on ministry and the commission on preparation for ministry now. That people trust the committees and commissions as well as the presbytery staff to be able to do the work without thinking that there's some underlying craziness going on in the background or anything. So that my role, I think, is just helping to continue to maintain that sense of trust by doing good work and being open, honest, communicating with the members of the presbytery. Um, and as far as what wish you could role play, I couldn't really think of anything
Okay,
on
that's
that
fair.
level.
That's
Yeah,
fair.
I really,
That's
really
fair.
couldn't think of anything. Because I've seen the worst in this presbytery, and I've seen the best. So considering the way things are now, there's not much that I could say that there's anything they could wish you could play. Now, if you had asked me that 13 years ago, there would have been difference in the answer. But
Absolutely.
now I'm really happy about that because I see across this denomination in other presbyteries other staffs. Um, it is not as the same in other places. I hear horror stories about the lack of trust, about backbiting, lack of respect and professionalism among Presbyterian staffs. So Charlotte Presbytery has a lot to be proud of. But us being the second largest Presbyterian in this denomination to have that level of trust is phenomenal. Everybody is now asking, please send us your COM framework. We want to understand, how that's working. How did you all get to that point where people are not micromanaging and having to do every examination on the floor of a presbytery, presbytery meetings? It's, because people feel like they can trust the members in this presbytery. And I am very, very proud of that.
Amen.
Oh,
Amen.
I didn't
Thank you.
get too long-winded, but I hope.
No, no, you're fine. And members, if you have other follow-up questions or concerns, please just shout them out or anything. That's good. That's good. No, this is helpful. This is really helpful because we're obviously not trying to go backwards.
Right.
And you're right. I remember all of that
Hmm.
mistrust and the back conversations around that. So
Yeah.
I'm in concurrence with you, agreement with you. Yes, we're in a much better place than we were as a presbytery those 13 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Well, looking into the future, if you could reimagine the presbytery's role according to your working role, what would you build? What would it look like? What would it do? And how could you participate in making that vision a reality?
Hmm. Well, that's I wear two hats on the office administrator side of the role. That was the one I really, really thought the most about.
Okay.
Whoever takes my role in the future. Hopefully it'll be somebody with a little bit younger, with a little bit more modernized communication skills, maybe a little bit better at technology and social media, because we're going into the future, so we definitely need to figure out a way to reach out to people that are not currently being reached. I know that this presbytery, as well as a full denomination, we're made up of a bunch of, say, 60 and up folk. But if we're ever going to be able to reach the 40-year-olds, the 50, and under, we've got to find out new ways of being able to communicate. And, it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So, I do the best that I can with communication, but maybe somebody else with a little bit more modernized technology skills, that might be something that we could look at for the future, and finding other ways to reach out into the community and into our congregations as well. So that's one thing, just kind of upgrading the communication skills. Um, and as far as the stated clerk work, um, the majority of my job is the office manager, the admin. Stated clerk works probably, 15 to 20 hours a week max. And I hope that, will pretty much stay the same. If whether that's two different people doing those roles or one person again, or however that's configured in the future. Um, Unless we have a PJC case, most of the time the state clerk work is not heavy duty. I just, it needs to be somebody that obviously has good parliamentary skills and being organized to be able to make sure that reports are turned into the denomination and that kind of thing. Um, but reimagining the role, that's something, maybe being more flexible about whether, like I said, maybe two people, three people, however, my job, Lisa's job, and um, what used to be Alice's job. Those could be reconfigured into different combinations of roles. So, need to be open to that in the future. It doesn't have to necessarily be one person doing a whole lot of different things, but it could be two or three different part-time positions.
Would you
Um,
even say that it's possible to have a new GP that is also a stated clerk as well? That's a
I don't think that
possibility.
that's a good AGP, yes, not GP. I think being the general presbyter and stated clerk, that was the model that the former presbytery had up until 2012. In this day and age, because of things like PJC cases and that kind of thing, I don't think that's a good idea. A couple of other presbyteries that have that model currently are changing it, including Coastal Carolina. They are now looking at Gerard's position, changing that and getting a separate stated clerk role. It's a lot of work to be a general presbyter, especially with a presbytery this size, with 92 churches and 275 ministers on the roll. It's very hard to be a GP, especially if you happen to have, like I said, if you got a PJC case, and it's hard to separate those two roles because you've got to be the pastor to the presbytery as well as having to do the judicial disciplinary part of it. So I definitely think that that's a role that should be separate. Now, AGP may be a different story. Joe, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
You
I just have a question, follow up question to that, if the time is right.
Yes.
Okay. So, so if your I hadn't thought about this till you said it, Tamara. If your position, say, was split into two part-time positions, could you imagine one or both of those being people who were shared with a congregation?
Oh, definitely.
Like a stated clerk who's also associate pastor at another congregation,
Yep. Or
or a
pastor,
pastor
yeah.
at another congregation
Hmm.
part-time. Same thing
Definitely.
with someone who's maybe an admin at a church and for the presbytery.
Right.
And
Many
would there
presbyteries in the denomination have people who are like full-time pastors and very, very part-time stated clerks. That's a model that's very common.
and so that doesn't run into conflict of issue problems,
Not usually. I mean, if
conflict of
someone
interest,
if
excuse
it
me.
was something like dealing with their church or a or like somebody on their staff, they would just have to recuse themselves. But that's rare.
Okay.
Yeah, but the majority of the state clerks that I know across the country have other roles as either pastors or maybe some other kind of validated ministry. Very few of them are full time on staff as state clerk.
Thank you.
And
Thank you. Go ahead, Matt.
Tamara, I have a follow up on that too, because and you may be new. We have been asking this question of, we were tasked with make a recommendation on staffing model in
Hmm.
general, and the fact that you do two jobs. But can you humor me and my ignorance for just a minute? Like, help me distinguish between stated clerk work that you do and office admin that you do, right? Because that's where, and not asking you to give me your whole job description, right? But like, tell me in a realistic day-to-day sense, like what makes those two things different?
Okay. The office manager at community is mainly doing like the communication stuff like the weekly email blast. Um, Maintaining the records, files and things on minister members, on churches, those type of things is kind of my day to day. And just general communications type of thing, and just being in the office when it's open, whether we have committee meetings here or not. The stated clerk work preparing for presbytery meetings, um, turning in the like when there's changes, like ministers being called to a church, I have to, there's paperwork that has to be submitted online to the national office, that type of thing. Um, Resourcing churches, as stated clerk, like if somebody has questions about polity, sometimes people may call me about nominating process in their church. Just being able to answer questions. I would say for the most part, the stated clerk work is probably about 15 hours a week on an average. Not a lot, and I mean that varies. It depends on what's going on. Like during statistical report season, I may be doing a little bit more stated clerk work because I'm resourcing, making churches are getting those kind of things submitted on time. I have to oversee the session minute readers to make sure those that gets done and submitted to me, and just making sure that reports are ready for the presbytery meeting, the docket, and planning like where presbytery meetings are going to take place, that type of thing. So it kind of comes and goes depending on what's happening. You know, we only have 4 presbytery meetings a year. Those days, I'm maybe aware the state clerk had a little bit more. This past year, obviously, but we had this major PJC case. That was the first time we'd had a PJC case in the last 12 years. So disciplinary stuff is not something I have to deal with on a regular basis. Praise the Lord. There are some presbyteries that have 2 and 3 PJC cases going on at the same time. I heard about some of those when I was at the Mid-Council Leaders Conference in October. Some of them were talking about like they've got 2 or 3 different cases going on at the same time. I can't, that would be a nightmare. Praise God for Charlotte Presbytery being a little bit more sane that we have had such a long run without having to deal with disciplinary cases. But you never know. That's something you can't plan for. You never know when something is going to pop up. So that's why I'm saying that type of thing it can raise the level of the hours that are needed as a stated clerk. But for the most part, it's mainly around presbytery meetings with the comings and goings, the receiving of new ministers, making sure that terms of call are submitted to Lisa properly and that type of thing. So it yeah. it definitely can be a smaller job if it's a part-time position for somebody that's a pastor or associate pastor or some other validated ministry could do. They would just have to, go through training, and they do have that. The national level, they have state clerk training for new clerks, and that type of thing, and it's ongoing. We have an ASC Google group. The Association of State Clerk has a Google group, sense of support for people who are in the state clerk position to get ideas from other long-term clerks about how to handle various situations, resources. Right. So that's one thing we do support each other across the country very well. Uh,
Well,
any-
and I have one last follow-up to that,
Mhm.
'cause you said this connectivity to other clerks, and you mentioned a number of them so far,
Mhm.
the associate pastor or pastor being part-time clerk and all that. For you, you are our Presbyterian's most tenured staff, right? And also mo one of the most trusted folks, I would imagine, in the denomination in that role. But what is it that you see as being the most compelling, like creative way forward? Is it doing like whether it's one you've already mentioned, an associate pastor, a pastor doing the role and splitting it this way, or is it something we haven't said yet? Like if you were handed the magic wand, staff your position, what would that look like?
Ooh. I definitely think the state clerk position could should be, maybe somebody who has another role,
Hmm.
three-quarter time pastor or something. Um, I I see that happening, across the country pretty much. And I definitely think that that's something that we should look at. The because we are only in the office 3 days a week, you could have a part-time office per person, maybe somebody, that does more remote work with communications, because I can do this same work, from home as far as like the email blast or keeping up the website. So it could be, a certain number of hours part-time. If it was combined with, say, like what, Lisa's position, that you could have a person that is a support person for COM, CPM, MRC, as well as communications. And that could be a full-time position if you did all of that. But I definitely think it could be, open to some flexibility on looking at those roles, not necessarily filling the roles as they currently stand. The associate general presbyter role, I think, needs to be somebody who is. This is one of the things we've kind of talked about as a staff with Alice. I don't think her gifts were challenged enough in that role. Um, I think it needs to be somebody that has maybe more visioning future, kind of looking at our churches, thinking about the future with real estate and creative ways of using campuses or combining, mergers or shared ministry, that type of thing. And that role could be a possible, like AGP slash stated clerk. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this could be done, but I don't think we need to be just set and just trying to fill in the slots as they currently stand.
Do you think the role, and this is another follow-up, do you think the role as a stated clerk could even be done from someone who's outside of the Charlotte Presbytery? Like if there was a stated clerk that was interested who lived in like Virginia, could that person do the stated clerk's work of the Charlotte Presbytery, but reside in Virginia?
Mm.
I know that would be tricky trying to plan presbytery meetings, but is it still possible?
Remote work, yes. I mean, I don't think you necessarily need to be in the Charlotte area, but as far away as Virginia might be tricky. I mean, I'd
Okay.
say maybe if it was somebody that was in North Carolina, say, you know, or even if they lived in Rock Hill, if it was somebody that lived in, Gaston County or Salem, near the Salem Presbytery, I just think that it would be a very, very hard to try to do remote work just because you never know what stuff might happen. That's a long haul trying to operate from 8 hours away or 6 hours away or whatever. Um, I definitely think would be more remote work can be done aesthetically. They would not have to be in the office daily. Um, there's no reason that why somebody, if they were in state clerk, except like to come to presbytery meetings, to make sure that the things are prepared for that. But you would not have to be in the office on a daily basis to be the state clerk. That could definitely be done remotely.
Okay.
I just think it'd be a little bit hard to manage from too far away.
Well,
That's just me.
I'm in agreement with you. I just knew that it might pop up. The question
Oh
really
yeah.
might pop up, and I wanted to get your perspective on it. Because I have heard of stated clerks being very, very remote.
Mhm.
Um, and I just wanted to make sure that we had the best kind of over a roundabout perspective on it, especially because it still needs to be uniquely to us, you know.
Right.
We're not a small presbytery at
Exactly. That was
all.
what I was going to say. The
Right.
fact that Charlotte is the second largest presbytery makes it a little harder for that. Some of the smaller presbyteries that have like 40 churches or 50 churches or, yeah, or even less, some of that kind of work because there's not quite as much coming and going. There's not as much turnover, not as many people under care like for CPM. Sometimes a lot of those smaller presbyteries have, 4 or 5 people under their CPM, where we've got, 20. And so, those kinds of things make it a little bit harder to do remote work for Charlotte just because of the size of this presbytery. Um,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
four
Um,
of the top 10 in size presbyteries in the denomination are in North Carolina. The only one that
mm,
is not in the top 10 is Western. All of the other ones are in the top 10 in size. So, yeah, Greater Atlanta is the only one bigger than us, and that's in, obviously Georgia, but it's still, yeah. There's a lot of Presbyterians in this state. Yeah.
really.
With
Absolutely.
with the size and availability, like I said, being in the office for when folks just drop in to ask a question
Mhm.
to pick something up. I'm trying to think about use of physical space these days, right? Is one of my favorite things to talk about. But how much do you see a value add in being in a building in the Charlotte area as the Presbyterian Charlotte like physical office? Does that make like the people come once a week, every day? Like how often are people dropping in the office?
Rarely now, especially since we don't have, most of our committee meetings and commission meetings are done on Zoom. In the days when we were meeting in person, it was pretty regular that we had meetings in here. Um, and staff, we're now just working Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Um, and, I think it's helpful to actually have us in the middle because we've got a lot of our files and documentation that's here. At least, whether it's 2 days a week, I think it's helpful to have that presence in the building just because of that. It's a workspace. The staff can at least get together to be able to just have discussions about what's happening. Um, so whether or not we continue to keep the entire amount of space that we have at Amity now, whether we reduce the number of offices or the space that we use in the future, we signed on for just 3 more years. So maybe when that third year ends, they might look at that, whether or not they want to, go to a total virtual office or whatever. A lot of presbyteries are doing that. You can get files put on, get them digitized and sent to the Presbyterian Historical Society. Um, that's something to look at for the future. It's a possibility. It's a little bit more tricky having to access files on churches or ministers or look up information when you've got to do it through the historical society rather than just being able to go into a file cabinet and pull out a file. But I mean, that's the wave of the future, so it's possible. But I don't see it, quite yet. I don't think we're quite there to the point where we can go totally virtual. Um, but like I said, maybe in the next 3 years, as things improve, and staff changes and all of that. So, that might be something that before they do the next lease agreement to maybe just look at, going totally virtual. Um,
Hmm. And it's on here, but it kind of goes, I think we all kind of get this, but we did have a question about how your role engages with other Presbyterian entities. like the national office and the Senate office. And so how much and I mean I know that your work as the stated clerk is very much involved with those other entities
Mhm.
in a unique, nicey little dance, especially when problems arise. But just speak a little bit to that if you don't mind.
Well, as I was saying, the Association of State Clerks, we have a Google group. We meet every month on Wednesdays at 4 o'clock to discuss. There's some training involved sometimes. Sometimes it's just discussion about what kinds of trends we're seeing, what like overtures that may be coming to the General Assembly. What are the hot button issues? Things like the ICE raids that have been going on. It is invaluable to me having that type of communication with other state clerks as well as general presbyters. There's a gazillion different names now for those that not everybody is called a general presbyter or an exec. They've got all presbytery leader and pastor to the there's a whole bunch of different names, but that community support, just bouncing off of each other, getting information and help support when times are rough, as well as when times are good. That's an ongoing thing. Every day we're on the Gmail or Google groups. Asking questions about things that are popping up and support, especially to people who are new to the position. So I'm saying, like whoever comes behind me as stated clerk or communicator will definitely find that an invaluable resource. Uh, we are very, very supportive of each other as mid-council leaders. Um, and so I could not have done this job in all these years without those folks. We have really become close friends and pray for each other, support each other in many, many ways. Um, so, yeah. Bye, Andrea.
Bye, Andrea. Thank
Bye,
you.
you all. I'm so sorry I have to log off. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for joining us. Have a
And
great day.
you too. Thank you all. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye
Um,
bye.
I was just going to say, also the folks in the national office now, I realize, that the unification
Ooh.
thing has been a little crazy in the last several months because, there's so many people have come and gone. They got, there's no such thing as a Presbyterian Mission Agency anymore. Now it's a unified agency. And so a lot of the folks that I have known over the years are no longer working there. Um, but the folks in that office work very, very hard to try to be as supportive as possible. I know some stuff that they've had to kind of keep close to the vest because they couldn't get leaked out to the whole world without um, being able to get things approved. There's some stuff that's got to be approved by the General Assembly next summer, as far as that is concerned. But those folks work very, very hard. We know that they are faithful, and they are very supportive of all of us in mid-council work. Um, and so, I have been closely engaged with all of the people who work in Louisville for years, and made good friends, and working at the General Assembly behind the scenes for multiple assemblies, gotten to know them very, very well. So I couldn't pick a better group of people to work with. They are just um, extremely dedicated to the work of this denomination. So.
Hmm.
The Senate
Amen.
office, not, I mean, obviously Warren Lassane, who just retired, is a member of this presbytery and used to be on the presbytery staff. So, supported him as much as he can. And now Flo is the Senate exec, and she's now, back being a member of this presbytery. So I feel like, we've got a good relationship with the Senate, but, their staff is much, much smaller. A lot of their things are done by committees. So don't necessarily know them quite as well, but I obviously feel very comfortable with our Senate exec. As
Right.
she's been a long time friend. So um, not sure if there's any other more details you all need on that.
Oh no, no, no. That was
Okay.
good. That was good. I mean, we talked
Hmm.
about because Matt lifted up the question about your staffing desire, what that would look like. And I think we got
Hmm.
a good handle on that. If you just want to lift up some joys of your work and role, that would be helpful. If not, one of the questions I kind of added on was, are there questions or concerns that our committee should know, that we should take back to the larger committee and group to think about as we discern our report to the presbytery? What are we not asking? What do we not know that you would love for us to know?
Okay. Well, one of the things I was going to say as far as joys is just getting to know the members of the congregations. Especially a lot of the clerks of session. Some of them have been in clerks for years. I feel like I've got a really, really good rapport with them. A lot of them will just call me up and ask me for advice about, how to handle various issues at their churches. And if like I said, if I don't know, I can usually point them in the right direction to a resource to get to. Um, but as far as um, staffing or your role in this is one of the things we've kind of discovered in the last couple of years, especially. So many of our congregations don't have pastoral leadership. We've got so many of our churches that they don't even have a temporary pastor. They just got a moderator. And we are really, really finding that many of our churches are desperately in need of officer training and guidance on polity and how to deal with things because we've got way too much discord and craziness going on with infighting or maybe people just taking way too much power because they don't have pastoral leadership or the officers have not been trained. Um, so this is not something that this particular group can do, but it may be something to look at for the future as far as staffing is concerned, how we can do a little bit better job of supporting our churches with so many of them that a few years ago might have had a pastor or at least a temporary pastor, but now, what can we do now to support those that are not in a position to be able to call a pastor or even some of them are just paying week by week pulpit supply, and we see a real decline in a lot of those congregations, and they're just hanging on by a fingernail. Um, and you wonder about, okay, who's preaching? What are they preaching? What are they doing? What does the church have any plan? We've got a vitality team that Veronica is kind of the supervisor, leading person for that. But it's I think that the number of churches that are going to be in deep trouble are growing as people are retiring. Pastors retire, then the church goes years without pastoral leadership. And we are seeing, like I said, craziness go on. That's when, we find out when, few elders that have, they have not had any kind of rotation of their leadership. They've had no elections for years. Same people running the church that were running it 20 years ago. And so they're not following book of order, not following any kind of polity. So I think that is a growing problem. So we are going to have to look at some staffing, or maybe even some changes in some presbytery committees to be more supportive. I mean, COM has got 36 members, and the liaisons are great, but liaisons cannot run, you know, officer training and all that for the churches. They can let us know what the needs are, but we've definitely got to look at some better ways to support. And also have support for our clergy as well that are dealing with churches where there's conflict, to make sure that we have pastoral care for those that are um, up against it in some of our congregations. Some of you, I mean, you all know some of the stories that we've got some churches where people have been beat up a little bit. Um, I mean, this is stuff that kind of haunts our staff on a regular basis. Uh, so it's like, what do we do to try to be as supportive as possible? Anything that anybody hasn't asked me that I want to make sure I don't miss out on something that you really, really want to know.
I have one more, but I've asked a couple. Joe B,
Oh,
do you have any?
Joe, nothing.
No? Okay. Well, then you get me again, Tamara.
Oh, no problem.
So I think I've heard you say throughout this conversation the role of trust and support, whether it's for your role or the presbytery's role with
Hmm.
congregations, etc. But when you talked about Betty, you said she really helped lead back into that season of trust and support. And so now my question is kind of to purpose that for the presbytery as a whole, not just for your role, but your view of it, the presbytery as a whole, what do you see as the purpose of our collective bodyism, right? Like that, is it one of exclusively support and we'll be there, like you can call us when something's wrong? Or what ways do you see the presbytery as a collective, staff included, being able to actually lead on fill in the blank on something, right? Or like, does that make sense? Like getting more active, proactive instead of reactive.
Hmm.
What ways do you, where do you see opportunity for that?
Ooh, tough question. Um, I think, Matt, what you just brought up about Betty and Sonia, when the Emmaus team was doing its work and they came up with the strategic plan, one of the things that they were looking at was trying to be more bottom up, where a lot of the um, mission and ministry was coming from the churches and congregations, and the presbytery was going to be more resourcing. I think that was a great idea, and it fit the time. But because, like I said, that we've got so many churches now that don't have any pastoral leadership, and they're kind of just like spinning around out in the ocean with no, nobody leading the ship. Um, that's the wave of the future that the presbytery you don't want to turn it around where the presbytery is running everything. You want to be still just be a resource, but we've got to be a little bit more proactive and helpful to congregations, and not just wait for them to call on us. It's got to be like more getting, whether two or three congregations get together and offer some officer training resources. um we obviously can't provide money to everybody. I know a lot of our churches are broke and they really are just living week to week. um but we've finding out whether they need stewardship resources to help them to find ways to be able to raise money, or better ways to use of their buildings and that kind of thing. So I really, it's hard to think myself. I can't come up with the vision, but I definitely think that that's something that for the future of this staff, that we've got to find better ways to not be top down, but at least be a more proactive resource rather than just waiting for the churches to come to us and ask. You know, we've got definitely got to get in the door a little bit more and find ways to I guess, like you said, Matt, be more a little bit more proactive, and before they're ready to shut down, close the doors, and say, okay, we're totally broke. We have nobody but five people left on the congregation, so we got to shut down. We've got to do a better job of getting in there to help them to try to not just survive, but to thrive and partner with other congregations. If there's two or three congregations that can share a pastor leader, or work together to do officer training, or whatever it is. But we've got to, definitely got to do a better job of not just waiting around for them to fail. And I don't have the answer, but I know that that's something that's got to be done more of, in the future. So,
I guess I want to ask a follow-up question. I was trying to figure out how to word it because what you just said is key. I mean,
mhm,
absolutely key. And the biggest response and truth that we're sitting with, which is very unfortunate, is that we none of us have the answers. I mean,
mhm,
really. So, I spent years on COM, um, and I get it from the support of other congregations as my own church. We're in our own space of struggle, not like
right.
other churches, but we have our own issues. And I guess I'm going back, and I'm hoping y'all will help me. develop the workings of my mind, because it's not going to come out right. So is it that, because again, I'm grateful I was on the Emmaus team, I was on the strategic team for a little bit, and I saw how that moved, how that
Hmm.
whole process moved, and it took years.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that needs to be said. It took years for us to get to the 2014-15 era, when we were really like, okay, well, we're going to start this. Um, and I can't say that Betty had all the answers, but she
No.
got us to the place where we were asking the significant questions and spent the time and the trial and error to get to sufficient answers that we were
Hmm.
livable answers, I guess is a better case. Okay, with all that being said, should it be that we're looking at a general presbyter or a staff person that is going to have these gifts, is going to frontline it, or should we go back to our kind of understanding that this is now the situation we're in, and we build teams within the presbytery to address our own issues? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Yeah, to some degree. And I think we're in a little bit different place than we were when Betty was, leading the MAS team and the strategic planning team through that, because, that was because of the drastic downsizing and total upheaval. And that's why I was saying we, had the trust issues and all of that. We're not in that place anymore. The trust is there. Um, and having that group that's with the COM Vitality team is kind of looking at, especially, we've got several of our African American churches that are struggling. They still don't, the pipeline is no longer there like it used to be, for leaders to come along, and our churches cannot afford full-time pastors. Small churches, many of them can't afford them. And as I was saying about the leadership, I think, Sonia, you're on the right path talking about either the vitality team or some other kinds of teams that could be done within the presbytery. And maybe the general presbyter might help to lead the process. I don't think that person should be the one to kind of come in with the total vision, but may be able to help lead that vision, and along with other members of the presbytery, to look at creative ways of going into the future, with shared ministry, like the thing with Jerry Cannon doing with the Board of Pensions, with the shared ministry with two or three churches sharing a pastor, or partnering, even with necessarily with other presbyteries, to do some, type of, depending on where our churches are. Some of them, could partner with other presbyteries. And, so I think that the whole partnership thing and having lots of voices involved in the future, it should not just be the general presbyter. I definitely think that would be just something that they could kind of help spearhead, maybe be open to creativity and hearing from different voices. Um, but yeah, I definitely think it needs to be some teams put in place. Whether it's one team or two or three. Focusing on different types of models. Um, that's something that could be looked at in the next year or so. Um, whether it's with council retreat, and with the 2030 vision team, and COM, some different voices maybe getting together and kind of looking at say, okay, let's look at a 2 year plan. What do we want to do at least for the next 2 years to kind of get this going, or whatever.
No, that was
Um,
it. That you answered
mhm,
my question. That was it, because I definitely don't want to go. I'm a strong proponent that the model of the interim ministry that we have is a model that doesn't work, and it's not
mhm,
worked for years. I mean, that, to me, I don't know why we still do that. And I've always gravitated towards, if there is a session, if you have a healthy session, that session board now needs to partner with an unhealthy session, and train and work and support them, not a person or an interim, but the actual session themselves. It's like, let the team encourage and build and help
mhm,
support each other. And so that actually was in line, thank you, of where I was thinking, um, because the team model worked from that. I mean, it was a slow process, but it did work, and it and
Mm.
it, it was a shared responsibility. And so when we were able to support congregation as a shared experience, and not just one person who may or may not get the credit, or may or may not show up, because again, I've served on several ACs, and when you need the whole team there and for it to
Yeah.
work. So no, that is very, very, very helpful. And I would never want that responsibility to rest on any GP,
Hmm.
because none of us are saviors. So
Right.
no, you answered the question. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Fellas, I'm good. Tamara's hit all the points and markers. Behind y'all's back, I call her lifesaver. She knows that anyway. She is the proverbial lifesaver for me. But I'm very appreciative for your wisdom, and candidness. This is definitely good and will be very helpful for us to give our report to the presbytery, and hopefully move us all forward. So, any follow-up questions from you guys or anything?
No, I think it's because the three of us will stay on for just a minute, right after Tamara drops off to kind of hit our last minute notes as we sign off. Is that right? Yeah.
That's
So
fine.
yeah, I'm
That's
good.
fine. Usually I'm alone, so there's no one to
Okay.
talk to.
Usually.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you all very, very much. Appreciate you asking questions and getting input from staff members. I think it's helpful. The GP search committee, the GPNC, they've also done the same thing. They've reached out to staff members as well as COM and other folk to get questions. I think it's always good to get various opinions and understand, kind of get buy-in from everybody. So I appreciate that. Appreciate all the work that you're doing. I know this is not an easy task. So prayers continue for your work.
Thank you.
And if I don't see you between now and then, y'all have a wonderful, blessed Christmas. And it was a joy to see your little angel this morning. She is really
Absolutely.
growing up. So you all have a blessed day. And
Thank you. You do the
I'll
same,
talk
and
to you
Merry
all soon.
Christmas. All right.
Okay.
Thank
Take
Merry
you.
care.
Christmas. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.